Sword and Shield Link was busted in the original Hyrule Warriors, most notably for the insane AoE and raw damage the multiple Master Sword beams at full health was capable of pulling off. Now in Age of Calamity, one-handed Link is once again one of, if not the most broken moveset in the entire game, but this time not because of the full health Master Sword beams, which do return, but rather because of its capability to force weak point gauges and ability to shred through the weak point gauge. This allows you to consistently take out a weak point gauge of almost any playable character boss, outpost, moblin, Lynel, or even guardian in just one cycle even on very hard mode, and at least take out sizable chunks of other bosses such as the giant bosses like Hinoxs or Stasis. I originally discovered these capabilities of the moveset after experimenting to find a way to take out the timed bosses on very hard difficulty, which usually have way too much health to reliably take off within the time limit the game gives you, and I first started doing these loops on day 2 post-release. We'll be going through just how to use Link's single-handed bustedness to shred through most weak point gauges, and how you can use rods to single-cycle loop bosses without them ever having the opportunity to fight back. Before we can start looping enemies to death, there's a couple premises we need to go through. The first premise is how one-handed Link extends his combos. This moveset has the unique ability to continue holding X after any strong attack and then release to continue with some more actions and extend the combo. Keeping this in mind and combining strings allows for some crazy potential strings you can pull off, like this. Doing these holding X versions of the combos to extend them can result in some better AoE options and damage, but the really big highlight of these extended versions is Link's combo 5 and combo 6, which are 4 Ys into X, or 5 or 6 Ys into X respectively, because these are options which can force the weak point gauge. Typically, when the weak point gauge is forced like this, it will only be active for about a second, but as we'll learn shortly, that is more than enough of a window for us to capitalize on for our purposes. The other big premise is optimizing Link's ZR attack, which is his bow. If used on the ground, it fires at this rate. But if you do it in the air, it will fire at this rate, which is likely in reference to Breath of the Wild's bullet time, which allowed you to get more shots in, and also break the physics engine of the game in half. You can use ZR nearly anywhere during a midair combo to cancel it out with a ZR attack. But what does the game count as midair, and what are the fastest ways to get this rapid fire flurry? Because it's not exactly fast to do, say, Y to X just to get a midair flurry. That's too slow. Well, as it turns out, ZR can cancel out almost any animation, and even the tiniest hops count as in the air for the rapid fire flurry. Rule of thumb is if you're literally any distance off the ground, you're going to get this rapid fire version. So the fastest way you can do a hop forward into the rapid fire flurry is by doing a dash attack with X and then hitting ZR. Perfect for if you're running by and you want to deal with some pesky keys or something. This may not be optimal when you're trying to whittle down a boss's weak point as optimized however you can, since after whatever string you just performed that you want to transition into the bow, you'd first need to dash to have your strong attack be the dash attack instead of the spin attack. So this is the best option for getting the rapid fire flurry of arrows while on the move. When fighting an opponent in a 1v1, your best option for getting this rapid fire flurry is with a backflip, by pressing down on the left stick while hitting B to dash, which can then be cancelled into the ZR bow attack. Doing this multiple times is one of the fastest ways Link can whittle down a weak point gauge, considering, similar to Breath of the Wild, time actually does slow during this, which you can easily visualize by seeing how the speed a Sheikah rune recharges will change. This means that not only are you getting an insane amount of hits in to whittle down the weak point gauge by doing the midair version, but you're also extending how much of a window you have available. This allows you to take off way more of the weak point gauge than you'd normally be able to, which can be especially helpful out of Link's extended combos that force the weak point gauge for normally only a very small window. Sometimes, just pressing down on the left stick and B won't be enough to get a backflip, as you may just have Link turn around by accident. To avoid this, there are two main ways to force the backflip. The first is to hold the ZL button, your shield, to force Link to face only forward, at which point turning the left stick will not change his direction he's facing. This was very useful in Breath of the Wild to line up to clip through walls, or to perfectly position yourself to bullet time bounce across the world. And now, in Age of Calamity, it's useful to force a backflip to ensure you get the rapid fire bow shot. The other method, and my personal preferred method, is to cancel out an attack with a backflip into ZR attack. When Link has started an attack animation and before it ends, no matter what you do to the left stick, he's not exactly going to be rotating a lot during that time. Which for our purposes, ensures that Link is facing forward so we can get our backflip into Rapid Flurry. This means that if you're in the middle of a combo, or just ended it and go for a backflip bow, you should be able to get it. If you're dashing around and waiting for the enemy to make its weak point gauge appear, I use this concept by running up to the enemy and doing the Y version of a dash attack and immediately cancel it into a chain of as many backflip bow shots as I can get. The dash attack triggers to the game, alright, the player made it here in time to start damaging the weak point gauge, so leave it available for X amount of time, as well as forcing Link to be facing forward to ensure you can successfully get backflips. You could in theory use the ZL shield method to force a backflip from anywhere to get as many backflip bow shots as possible, instead of having the first moment be used for a measly Y dash attack, which doesn't do as much to the weak point gauge. But regardless, the dash attack method is still my preference, because it ensures that you're at a closer range, and therefore it's more likely all of your bow shots will actually connect. The last important note about the bow is that there are certain enemies that you can headshot, such as Moblins or Lynels, or certain enemies that you can eye-shot, such as Guardians or Hinoxs, which will also force the weak point gauge. So if the weak point gauge is already out, it'll force it out to be just a bit longer, and if it's not out at all, it'll force it out. This, however, won't work if you've already forced it out with this method within some span of time, and probably some other factors I don't yet understand. Stunning enemies like this while their weak point gauge is already out doesn't seem to add the headshot stun timer onto the already existing stun timer. It just seems to replace however much stun is left with how long the headshot stun lasts. Because of this, against Moblins, Lynels, and Guardians, I'll often do 1 or 2 volleys to the body first, just to get the last bits of real estate off of the current stun timer, and then I'll go for the headshot or eye shot, to then get the available stun time of that, to maximize how much weak point gauge I'm able to take off in one fell swoop. This can be combined with the extended holding X combos that Link can perform. For example, performing say combo 5 will have most of the combo deplete the weak point gauge, but before the final 2 strikes go through, the weak point gauge will likely be hidden again by now. The last 2 strikes go through, which forces the weak point gauge for enough time for about 2 backflip arrow volleys, so first volley aim for the body, second volley aim for the head, and continue to do volleys for as long as the weak point gauge lasts. The last premise to cover is using Stasis during combos on a weak point gauge. If you use Stasis on an enemy while the weak point gauge is out, it will continue to be out while they're stasised. This means that things such as combo 5 or 6, which typically only force the weak point gauge out for like a second, can be capitalized on way more, and buy you enough time to do another combo 5 or 6 to force the weak point gauge again, after which you can do a body arrow volley, and then go for a headshot to force the weak point gauge for a 3rd time in a single opening. When in doubt, remember, Stasis breaks this game in half. This unfortunately means you won't be able to capitalize as much off of openings caused by using the correct Sheikah rune to counter an enemy's attack, unless it's an enemy you can headshot, in which case you can probably still pull off a Stasis as long as you have the first set of rune cooldown upgrades available about halfway through the story, which we'll be discussing as we actually get into the looping. Now then, with these premises in mind, how can we take off weak point gauges in one cycle, and then use rods to loop that bitch Thunderblight? I mean, most bosses of the game. Let's start with taking off a weak point gauge in one cycle, and I'll use a Moblin for example. I'll be covering my go-to methods. Moblin creates an opening with a weak point gauge. I'll run in and do combo 5. The reason I don't do combo 6 to force the weak point gauge is it takes longer, and the Moblin is almost certainly going to hit you before you force the weak point gauge if you do attempt combo 6 here. Okay, so on editing this, I realized that combo 6 is actually a much better option than I gave it credit for. The reason why I say to do combo 5 in this is because I figure, hey, there's more actions behind combo 6. You need to do one more Y press before you press X, so there's more of a chance that the opponent hits you, right? It made sense in my head. But the thing is, with combo 5, when you do 4 Y presses into this, there's that gap of time right there between the final 2 strikes, and that's one of the big reasons that the weak point gauge goes away, and the enemy has a bit of an opening to potentially hit you if they do like a really, really fast option, and if you don't time your X release super well. So the thing about combo 6 is, I almost said 5, is if you do 5 Y presses, while it takes longer, the attacks are more frequent. And it seems like the weak point gauge initially goes away during combo 5 during that one like very extended kind of gap, and it seems to make no real difference in how long it lasts between combo 5 and combo 6. I can't words today. Just because combo 6's attacks are more frequent. So honestly, combo 6, just because it's more strikes, might honestly be the better option. So if I do combo 5 here, 1, 2, 3, 4, the weak point gauge goes away. And if he does anything that isn't a super fast option, he gets hit by that anyway. And then I do combo 6 and it one cycles him. But to potentially do even more damage, combo 6 might honestly straight up be the better option. Like, let's see the gap here with combo 6 if you do something that does not use a Sheikah rune, just to illustrate my point. Alright, do your 3 swings. And then 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Then this. Like, it seems to create about the same kind of opening. Like, they're still gonna hit you if they do, like, a really, really fast option. But the opening seems to be about the same-ish. Like, combo 5 might still be your better, faster option just to, like, reduce the chances even more of getting, say, Falcon kicked or something like that by the Moblin doing, like, a super fast option. But assuming they don't do that, maybe combo 6 is better. I mean, it might be a little bit more of a risk because, let's see here. The weak point gauge didn't even get forced out at all by combo 6 that time. I don't know, there's a lot of things about this that seem weird and inconsistent. I've had some of these combo 5 and combo 6s not work against specific enemy types. Sometimes it just won't work for other reasons that I don't quite understand. Maybe combo 5 is probably still the better option just for, like, consistency of forcing out the weak point gauge, because sometimes combo 6 is weird. I don't know. It's a very strange situation all in all. I'm going to do combo 6 again. Like, that time it forced it out. I noticed that sometimes that final strike of pressing X initially for combo 6 will force out the weak point gauge, and other times as well, it'll be like the final 2 hits after releasing X if you do the holding X version. It is very strange. Play around with it on your own time if you want to try out stuff like this. Either way, you should be one cycling most enemies, and it's not going to be the biggest deal. Just know that there is going to be a little bit of a gap of time. Whether it's, let's just go over here to illustrate my point. There is going to be a little bit of a gap of time between that and then these 2 strikes if you do combo 5, and there is going to be a bit of an opening if you do combo 6. Just generally because it lasts so long and the weak point gauge is gonna be away by then. I didn't even realize you could come in here during training mode. What are you? I didn't realize. What the heck? I'm trying to. I'm making a guide here and I'm going off script because I needed to correct myself. Anyway, so yeah, I may just edit out parts of my script that talk about like that opening and specifically doing combo 5. Like it might still be better to do combo 5 just for less risk. Especially considering combo 6, for some reason, won't force out the weak point gauge every once in a while just because it's weird and this is a perfect game with no bugs or flaws whatsoever. So maybe still start out with combo 5, Stasis, combo 6, bow flurries, stuff like that. But if you want to be spicy, it's not really going to be the end of the world if you start out with combo 6, unlike what I say in the script and what I might edit some bits out of. As well, since I'm saying stuff now that would normally be in the script anyway that I might just wind up editing out, one note that I would like to make is it's very important to make sure that you time your release X well. to limit that window as much as possible, to limit the possibility of getting hit with like a really fast option, like a Moblin's kick, or just a forward spear poke like they can sometimes do as well. So if you release X too soon, then you've got no additional strikes. If you release it too late, then you've got like way more of a window that you've just given to the enemy who's almost like, I can't words today. If they do a fast option, it's almost certainly going to hit you. And you just gotta cross your fingers that that doesn't happen. And the same thing applies for combo 6. So be mindful of the opening. And yeah, I did it way too early that time. I didn't get the additional inputs, for example. Be mindful of the opening. It takes some practice and muscle memory on your own time, just to limit that window as much as possible, to limit the chances of you getting hit and your combo being interrupted. So, enemy creates a window. Dash in and perform extended combo 5. Immediately after the final hit, which forces the weak point gauge, Stasis. From here, you can perform either combo 5 or 6, considering you no longer need to worry about being hit with a fast option like Falcon Kick. I prefer combo 6 as it does more weak point damage, and there's now enough of an opening to pull it off. Combo 5 works as well, but may not result in as much weak point damage. Stasis wears off. Combo 5 or 6 forces the weak point gauge again. If it's an enemy I can't extend the stun with a headshot on, which is pretty much every playable character boss, then I'll backflip arrow volley twice. If it's an enemy I can headshot or eye shot, then I'll backflip volley to the body, backflip volley to the head or eye, and then continue to do backflip volleys as much as I can until the weak point gauge breaks or I run out of time. No. Okay. Prepare to get looped upon right this instant. I love this string so much. It's so cool and satisfying and everything. Okay, body shot and then headshot to, oh, or not. Headshot, please. There we go. Come on. Yep, there we go. Don't you love being able to take out an entire Lynels stun gauge in one fell swoop? Once more, opening is created. Combo 5, Stasis. Combo 6, backflip volleys. Against most enemies, this is going to allow you to break a weak point gauge off of just one opening, even on very hard mode. Shit. Let's tackle another situation. What if the enemy created an opening off of you using a Sheikah rune on it, so you can no longer use Stasis to extend this combo? If it's an enemy that you can headshot or eye shot to force the gauge, and you have at least the first of the Sheikah cooldown upgrades which become available, then it's still possible to break the weak point gauge off of one opening. Start with combo 5 again, and then do 2 backflip volleys. First to the body, then to the head or eye. Continue to do volleys, and somewhere along the way here, Stasis should be recharged. Stasis, combo 6, more volleys, and the weak point gauge should break along the way. Even if the enemy made an opening without forcing you to use a Sheikah rune, you could still do this as an alternative to the other combo anyway. Unfortunately, what attacks can force the weak point gauge seem to change from enemy to enemy, and even enemy type to enemy type. As I went through the story, I generally had to experiment with what ways I could force weak point gauges. Don't expect to break weak point gauges in one cycle on giant bosses such as Taluses or Hinoxs, and sometimes on character bosses who you can't headshot for extra stun timer may still have some weak point gauge remaining depending on the mission. Screw you, Koga. As well, this is all easier said than done if you've got multiple enemies on your ass giving you a hard time. Now, how do we turn it into an inescapable loop? After you've weak point smashed the enemy and they're on the ground, use an elemental rod on them that forces the stun gauge. It's typically only ever not going to force a stun gauge if you use an elemental rod of the same type as the enemy. So like, don't use an ice rod on an ice Lynel, stuff like that. Rod forces the weak point gauge, which you can then follow up with combo 5. But why is it inescapable if we already established there's a short opening between combo 5 and its last 2 attacks where the enemy is able to do something? Well, this window typically still exists, But if you use the rod on them while they were knocked down from the last weak point smash, then during that window, they'll be in the middle of a standing back up animation, and then immediately be hit with the last 2 hits of combo 5. Stasis. Do the rest of the string as discussed. Another weak point smash again. Do it again. So you could say that initially getting the loop going by breaking the weak point gauge in one cycle the first time carries some risk based on your own timing and the enemy's decision of how to use the span of time between combo 5 and its extended hits. But once you're past that, you're in the clear from here, as it becomes inescapable as long as you're breaking the gauge in one cycle each time and using the elemental rod on the enemy before they've recovered from the last weak point smash. Technically speaking, it's not infinite, considering you've got 1 full weak point break per every available rod use you have, but assuming you've got an inventory of rods, then you should be deleting any foe you can in one cycle before you even have to think about running out of rods. Anyway, there you have it, the rundown on my crazy loop combo I figured out a few days after release, and something I straight up would not have been able to beat some of the very hard difficulty missions without. I hope you were able to learn a thing or 3 about making your one-hand Link super busted. If you'd like to see my 5-day adventure through the entire story in very hard mode, and see firsthand how I handled bosses, you'll find the playthrough in the description below. I think this will most likely be the only character moveset guide I do for Age of Calamity, unless I discover anybody else that has something equally broken. Anyway, I hope you found this guide helpful. Thanks so much for watching. Backflip volley that subscribe button if you enjoyed, yada yada. Now go use this knowledge to annihilate that bitch Thunderblade in Age of Calamity. Hold on. Let's actually switch bows. We have 339 ancient arrows, and we have the Savage Lynel bow that we durability transferred the ancient bow's durability from. So we can, he's facing the complete wrong way. Yes, aim to the left. Look at this. Freaking archery 101. This is how to archery. Yes, look. Easy peasy, but now we can no longer do that because he has his shields up, so we actually have to like semi-fight him normal. That amuses me how he aims like that way though. Yeah, it's auto aim.